Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you the basics of Adobe Camera Raw. If you'd like to follow along, in the description of this video, I've included the 5 RAW files that I use in the course of this tutorial. You can go ahead and download those. Now, the first thing I want to cover is the updates to the Adobe Camera Raw interface. If you're familiar or have used Adobe Camera Raw in the past and you see the new interface, you may be wondering where some of the tools are, where some of the panels are, and so forth. So I'm going to quickly show you where those have moved to. So this is the interface for Camera Raw 11, and this is the new interface for Camera Raw 13, and there were some significant changes to the interface, and I want to cover those first. So this is where the tools used to be, and these have all moved, and this is the new interface to this right side here. So all these tools here are what used to be along the top here, with a few exceptions. So the first one is the white balance eyedropper tool. That is now in the basic panel here next to white balance. You can see that eyedropper there. All right, next we have the straighten tool, and that is now inside the rotate and crop tool here next to the angle. So that's where you're going to find that. And then lastly, the geometry tool here is now one of the panels. You can see that here, geometry. The other significant change is in the Camera Raw 11. You can see here that all your panels for developing your image are now in the new interface drop down panels. So rather than tabbing them along the top, they've essentially made them collapsible panels in one straight line. So if you'd like, you could open them and then kind of scroll through all of them rather than having to tab through them. And then the presets and snapshot, which used to be their own tabs here, have now moved here. So this is the snapshots, and this is the presets. So those are the changes to the user interface. And if you understand those, you'll see that virtually all the tools within Camera Raw have not changed. They've simply been moved inside the interface, with the exception of color grading, which I'll cover in a separate tutorial. All right, now that we know where things have been moved to, what we're going to do is take our first photograph and run it through all the basic tools and functions of Adobe Camera Raw, and you're going to get an idea of how some of these tools work. So I'm going to go ahead and open some Camera Raw files. And as you can see here on my left side, there's a film strip of the various images. If I want that film strip to be along the bottom, I can click and hold on this. That'll give me my options here. I can go horizontal. That's going to show them down here. If I don't want to see them at all, I can just click on this once, and now I'll just see the image that I'm working on, and I can click it again to open it. Personally, I prefer having the film strip on the left side there. So I'm going to put it back there, and for now I'm going to turn it off. All right, next thing I want to do is just quickly go through these various panels here. So here you have your histogram. You can use your histogram to adjust the blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites, but you can also do that here with these sliders. The function is the same. As you can see, when I move this in the histogram by clicking and dragging, I'm also moving the exposure slider. All right, so first thing is the temperature, which is essentially the white balance and tint. If I want, I can use the white balance tool, and to use that, you're basically going to select a area of your image that should be neutral, so it should not have color in it. So this is concrete ground. it should be relatively neutral. If I click on that, it's going to try to correct, based on that being neutral, what all the other colors in the image should be. Now this has given the whole image a cyan tint, which probably means that this really isn't neutral. It's probably a bit of a, it probably has a bit of a cast on it. So let's go back to as shot, and we can also just adjust these manually. So if I want this to be warmer, I can adjust the warmth. That generally for a beach scene always looks a bit nicer. So maybe something like that. If I want to increase the exposure, I can do that here. The exposure on this is already pretty good, so I might just bump it up a little bit. Next is contrast. That's going to allow me to adjust the contrast of the image. Maybe bump that up a little bit. Okay, then next you have highlights and shadows. Often if you want to add more dynamic range to your image, you can take down the highlights and bring up the shadows, and that's going to bring out some of the detail in here and bring some of the detail back into our highlight areas. That's something that I generally do on images just to give it a little more dynamic range. Whites and blacks, you usually don't want to mess with those, but if you want to give the image kind of a more high contrast look, what you can do is bump up the whites and take down the blacks, and that's just going to push the whites and blacks toward the edges there. Alright, next we have texture, clarity, and dehaze, and what these do is they add contrast to various frequencies of your image. So you can kind of imagine it as going, the low frequency is dehaze, texture is the high frequency, and clarity is the mid frequency. So if I increase texture, it's going to basically sharpen the image by increasing the contrast in the very high frequency areas. Clarity is going to do the same thing, but to the mid frequencies. So as you can see, it's adding that contrast to my mid frequencies, and then dehaze is going to do it almost like adding contrast to the image. It's going to add contrast in the low frequencies. So that's what those three do. Then next we have vibrance. For this image, I may want to add some vibrance to give my water here a little bit more color. And then we have saturation, and the difference between these two is vibrance is kind of smarter than saturation. Saturation is going to increase all the color across your entire image, whereas vibrance is going to increase the color or the saturation of the colors and try to leave the neutral or skin tone areas alone. So this generally, if you're going to add color to your image, use vibrance instead of saturation. Okay, so pretty happy with that. Next we have curves. Curves is going to allow you to add a curve to your image. If you're familiar with Photoshop, you probably already used a curve. The curve allows you to add points. So similar to your histogram, this is your shadow area, this is your highlight area, and if you want to like add an S curve, which is going to increase contrast by increasing the lightness of your light areas, decreasing the darkness of your shadow areas, you could do that. And with the channels here, you can actually make some nice color effects. So for example, if I want this to be a little more blue, I can go into my blue here and just bring up the bottom, and this is the light area. So if I bring back down the light, well, we're gonna get that yellow back in there. So there you can see. And for any of these, if you want to reset them, just hold down Option and you're going to get a reset option there. So if I want to get rid of that, I can do that quite easily. All right, next we have detail, and detail is going to allow you to sharpen, reduce noise, and reduce color noise. Pretty self-explanatory. For an image like this, I really don't need any of those. It doesn't have high noise. We're going to cover one of these other ones, this one here, where we might do some noise reduction. But for this image, I don't need noise reduction, so we'll leave that alone. Next, we have the color mixer, and this allows you to adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance of targeted colors. So in this case, I want my greens and my aquas to be more blue. So I'm going to go to hue here and push the greens toward blue and also push the aquas toward blue. And you can see my water here is becoming more blue, but I'm not affecting the rest of the image. So this is a nice way to target select colors in your image that you want to target. For example, I might want to make my yellows a little warmer and push these more toward those colors there. I can also do that to the saturation. If I want my water more saturated here, I can push up the greens and the aquas like so. We're going to do a little more to this to really punch up the contrast between these two using a different tool, but we can do a little bit of that with our color mixer there. I'm not going to cover color grading in here, but essentially this is kind of an advanced split toning. You can add colors to your shadow, add color to your highlights, and they've added, with the color grading tool, they've added this midtone so that you can actually add a color to your midtones. You can also use this global one to add just a color across your whole image. So if you want to give it a color tone or a photo filter, you can do that here. For this image, I don't need it, so let's reset that. Again, to reset, after you've made a change, just hold down Option, and then you can click right up here on Reset Color Grading. All right, next we have optics, and this allows you to make corrections based on the lens that you used to remove chromatic aberration, and also to correct distortion and vignetting of the lens. This is already built in. This is a GoPro, or sorry, not a GoPro, a DJI drone, so it's already built in. So we're not going to use that. We will use it on one of the other images. All right, next we have geometry. So this allows you to kind of straighten the image. Let's see what happens if we push auto. You can see that kind of straightened it out there. You can also just straighten out the horizontal lines, just straighten the vertical lines. This will apply level, horizontal, and vertical correction. And then finally you have this, which is the guided version, and this is my preferred version. With this, you turn it on and then you're going to draw lines. So I want to draw a line there and here, and it's going to use that information to straighten the image. So in this image, I don't need any vertical I don't need any horizontal adjustment. So just putting those two lines does all the straightening that I want. And let's hit escape. That's going to pull us out of the tool. And next we have effects. Effects allows us to add grain to the image and vignetting to the image, neither of which I want for this. So we're just going to hold down Option and reset that. Lastly, we have calibration. Calibration basically allows you to make fine-tune adjustments to the way your image is defining the colors. So if you want to make changes, like for example, if I feel like my red is too much on the orange side, I could push it toward the magenta side. This is used for if you're, shot a wedding, for example, with two different cameras, and one of them is determining the neutrals a little bit more magenta. You could come in and make those adjustments. Personally, I don't really use this, but there are some interesting tutorials on YouTube where people really use this almost to color grade their image. Personally, there's other tools that I much prefer to do that with. Okay, so that kind of covers all the basic develop panels here. Next, I just want to go down these tools real quick so you see what they do. The first one is crop and rotate. So in this case, if I want to, make a portrait for Instagram, I can go to 4:5. That's going to crop it to the Instagram proportions. If I'm printing it on 8.5:11, I could do that. Basically just allows you to crop your image. Pretty straightforward. To rotate, just put your mouse outside here like this and you can rotate. And you can also use this straighten tool. If you click on that, you're basically going to click and drag maybe along a straight line in your image, and then it'll adjust the rotation to that. Now for this image, I don't need to do any of that. So this little tool here is going to reset it. I don't know why they didn't apply the same behavior where if I hold down Option, I can reset. So if you see this little reset thing here, that's what it's for. You can also rotate your image and flip it horizontally. So for example, if I wanted this whole image to kind of have the water along the top, I could do like that, and that gives me a whole different view of this image. I might like that better. Personally, I kind of like the way it was shot like this. I feel that the bottom is where the water, where your mind wants the water to be, at least for this photo. All right, next we have the spot healing brush. And what this allows you to do is select a point. So let's go in here. I'm going to make this bigger, maybe 400. And do this. Allows me to paint over an area, and it's going to choose an area next to it or somewhere in the image to paint over that. Now if I don't want to see these overlays, I can hit V to turn them off and then V to turn them back on. So there you go. If I wanted to get rid of some of the people, I could do that. Now you'll notice this one is leaving some of the shadow. So let me turn V back on. I might want to adjust this, or I might look at this and maybe think, you know, the feather's too strong, and that's why it's showing some of that. So you can make adjustments here to the size. The size is going to adjust your brush. It won't affect the one you have selected, but feather will, and so will opacity. And let's zoom out. I don't really need to do any correction on this. We're going to use it. It's great for like portrait retouching, so we'll cover that a little bit more in the next image that we're going to work on. All right, next we have the brush adjustment tool. And these three, the brush adjustment, the gradient adjustment, and the radial adjustment, what they do is they allow you to target specific areas of your image with the adjustment tools in your basics panel. So you can adjust temperature, tint, exposure, contrast, all these things in a targeted area. So let's target this water. Oh, and there's also one cool addition here, which is this hue. And that allows you to kind of shift the color in your image. So let's go ahead and paint our water here. Now you'll see that it's making it darker, and that's because there's an exposure adjustment here. I don't want that, so I'm going to reset it. Now the problem is if I have no adjustments, I can't really see where I've painted. So you can turn on mask options here, and that'll allow you to see where you've painted. So here you can see where I've painted. And I'm just painting over this area here. And if I click on this, you can see I can adjust the opacity and also the color and brightness. So you may want to actually have the opacity on 100, because here my flow and density will determine when I paint how much my effect will apply to this area. So having this on 100% opacity shows me if my mask isn't fully applied there. All right, I can also erase. So for example, I may want to erase this bridge here. So I'm going to make my brush small enough and then just go in and paint out this bridge. And this, between all these tools, you can really do quite a bit of fine adjustments in your image using Camera Raw. And another helpful thing to know is that if you understand how to use all these tools in Camera Raw, you can pretty much do everything in Lightroom as well, because this engine is also what Lightroom uses to develop photos. All right, so there you go. Now, if I want to turn off the mask overlay, the shortcut for that is Y. And now I can maybe move my water more toward blue, maybe increase the exposure just a little bit. I can even adjust my hue here if I want to go a little bit more toward blue, but I kind of like more of a cyan-y blue, so leave that there. Maybe take down the highlights so we get a little more detail in those, the white waves there. And maybe pump up the vibrance too, or the saturation. Something like that looks really good. All right, so now I'm done with this. I can hit escape. That's going to take me out of the tool. Now you'll notice it went to this when I hit escape, and that allows me, because I'm still on the tool here, to start a new one. So if I wanted to do one on the sand, I could do that. But for the sand, we'll just use a graduated filter. So in this case, rather than brushing, I'm just dragging, and anything from the green backwards is going to be fully applied. Anything from the red forward is going to have no effect applied to it, and this is going to be a gradiated filter between the green and the red. I want to see my mask, so I'm going to turn that on, and you'll notice here you can also turn on or off the overlay, so that's pretty nice. Now for this, obviously I don't want to have it 100% opacity because I want to see what's going on behind. There are some cool tricks that you can do with the gradiated filter as well. Let's see here. And that is down here toward the bottom, you have a range mask. And what a range mask allows you to do is apply it just to a color area or a luminance area. Now I know I want to apply this primarily to my beach colors. So I can go to color here and then select this beach color. And if I want to select from kind of the light beach, I'm going to go ahead and hit Y to turn off the overlay for now. If I want to select kind of from this light color all the way to the dark, what I can do is drag like this, and it's going to select that whole color range. Now you'll see it's no longer selecting the colors inside. It is still selecting the bridge, so I could go here and maybe see if I did adjust this. So if I adjust this much lower so it doesn't have as much tolerance, it's now getting rid of more of this bridge. I can also, once I've made this, go in here and actually erase from it. So I can go take my feather down, take my size down, bring my flow up, and then actually erase the part that I don't want affected by the gradiated filter. So a lot of control there. Like so. Another trick, if you want to make a straight line, click once, hold down Shift, click again, and it'll make a straight line between those two spots. So for something like this, that certainly comes in handy. Okay, so let's hit Y again, and now that I have my mask nicely built, we can go in here and make the adjustments we want. So for this, I want it to be warmer. I want my sand to be kind of a more golden color. And maybe increase the contrast a bit. And then here, maybe I want to move it just a little bit more toward magenta. So something like that. Good. Now I'm going to hit escape. And now I have the option to create a new gradiated filter because I still have the tool selected. If If I want to get out of that, I can go here. And these also have shortcuts, by the way. So if you just hold down your mouse, you'll see E is the shortcut for that, C is the shortcut for that, B is the shortcut. And that, similar to Photoshop, just a single click will bring you to that tool. All right, next we have the radial filter. For this, I don't really need one, but it's very similar to the gradient filter, except for it's obviously a radial filter. So something like this. I don't want any of these. This is personally my preferred way to do vignettes, just because I have more control. I can do something like this, turn off my mask with Y. Now you'll see if I make it darker, it's adding a nice vignette, and we can adjust our filter there. But for this image, I don't need it, so we'll just get rid of it. All right, next we have the red eye. This fixes red eye. Obviously, it only applies to portraits. It does have a red eye for humans and a red eye for pet. Honestly, in all the time that I've ever used Camera Raw, I've actually never used this tool, just because modern cameras do a good job of not having red eye. All right, next we have snapshot. Snapshot allows you, as you're making a correction, to add a snapshot. So you can say, you know, vibrant version. And then if I want, I could make a whole different set of edits, like so. You know, let's make this pretty different here. And then go back to here and call this black and white. And now what I can do is I can go and look at those two versions. Now you'll notice that the rotate did not stick. So just realize that some of the things in there in the snapshot are not going to be affected by it, but all your actual edit settings will be affected by it. And if you want, you can always throw these away. All right, next we have presets. So presets are various presets, and that is really the simplicity of presets. You can also build your own presets, so you can create a preset here. If you just click on this, it'll take your current settings and turn it into a preset. You can also load presets, so if someone might be selling Camera Raw presets, you can load them here. Also profiles you can load in here. So this just are basically presets, simple as that. And then here finally you have some additional tools like resetting to default, applying that previous settings, creating a preset, etc. You can do all that from here. Okay, so I'm happy with the corrections that I've made to this. If I want to compare them to the original, I can click here, you'll see. So I mean, this is a cool image, but it kind of feels dreary and dead. And that's the new one. It's straightened out. It has a lot more vibrance, etc. This gives you different views. So if you want to do a left and right comparison, if you want to do a split comparison, you can see that is splitting the image in half. So these are all options for how you might want to view it. Personally, I like the single view and being able to just toggle between before and after. And you'll notice if I hold my mouse down that the shortcut for that is the / key. So there you go. And then finally, last few things here. If I click on this, you'll see my preferences. And this is going to show me how I'm saving the file, if I resize it, what bit depth it's going to open in Photoshop and so forth. So that's what clicking on that does. I mean, basically sets your workflow. And then I can cancel to get out of this. I can hit done, which will apply the changes to my Camera Raw file. And then I can hit open, which will open this in Photoshop. And I have the option here, if I click and hold to open as a smart object, open the original, or open as a copy. Generally, if you're gonna use your image in a composite, you would want to open it as an object so that you always have the ability to go back. That's just kind of my default state. You can also change it here to open in Photoshop as a smart object. You'll notice that my default here now changed to open object. So that's kind of the basic run through, and as you can see, we've made adjustments to this image, which I'm quite happy with. So let's go ahead and open. That's going to open it in Photoshop. The next thing we're going to do is take a studio portrait and run that through Adobe Camera Raw. And in the course of this, you're going to learn about some of the more advanced retouching tools. And I'm also going to show you a cool trick on how you can do a quasi frequency separation inside Adobe Camera Raw. Let's get started. So first things first, whenever I start a portrait retouch, whether I'm doing it in Camera Raw or Lightroom, is adjust some of the basics. So for white balance, I can select this background, see what that does. It's corrected it quite nicely. Although for skin colors, I generally prefer kind of a warmer tone. I just think that looks nicer. So something like that. And for her skin tone, she does, this image does have kind of a green tint to it. So I might just push this a little bit more toward magenta, just to have that more nice warm skin tone. So pretty happy with that. The exposure is quite nice already. I don't want to make it over bright, so we'll leave that. I might want to make the shadows just a little bit lighter, so let's push those up just a little bit. When I'm doing a female portrait, I really don't want to mess with these broadly, because the effect isn't nice. Using clarity on male portraits is a good idea, but not on female portraits. That's really all I'm going to do here. I do want to go to optics and correct this for my lens. It's going to select the lens that I use, which is a Nikon lens. So it's already done all that for me and removed chromatic aberration. Geometry is fine. I don't want a vignette or effect, so I'm going to leave all the rest alone. We don't need to change the crop or rotation, so let's go to the heel brush. And this is on portraits, you're going to end up using the heel brush a lot more than you would on like landscape photos, just to clean up little skin blemishes and things of that nature. So I already have the tool selected. Everything looks good. You can also visualize spots here. So this allows, here, let's zoom out just a little bit here. This allows you to kind of look at what spots might need to be fixed up, and you can slide this across. I don't find this very helpful unless I'm looking for either sensor noise or dust on my lens. For actual skin, I think looking at it visually is much easier. So let's go ahead and start cleaning these up. You'll notice that I don't have the overlay turned on. If I want to turn it on, I can hit V, but it gets quite distracting when you're trying to clean up skin to constantly see these things. So I would leave those out. Just hit V again to hide them, and we can keep painting over these spots here. You can always adjust your brush size with the bracket left and right tools or keys. I'm not a big fan of the nose ring here, so I'm just going to get rid of that. Now you'll notice that this looks like something got rid of there, so I'm going to hit V and see where it's sampling from, and maybe sample something with closer to the texture there that's already there. Something like that. So now we're getting those skin pores that kind of matching up with the surrounding. Just looks a little bit more realistic. All right, good enough. Let's zoom out. Yeah, that looks nice. Okay, next we're going to go to the local adjustment brush. And what I want to do here, let's go ahead and make sure this is reset, so it's not going to apply any changes. And I want to turn on my mask overlay so that as I'm painting here, I can see where it's going to apply my effect. So let's just start painting. And what I want to do is apply kind of a fake, or I should say a camera raw version of frequency separation. And it's definitely not anywhere as close to as good as what you can do inside Photoshop, but it's a neat trick. So I'm painting all the areas that don't have high detail. And I'm pretty happy with that. Let's zoom out so we can see our whole face at once. I'm going to turn the mask overlay off. I'm going to go down here to texture, clarity, and dehaze. And what I want to do is bump up the texture just a tiny bit, and then take down the clarity, and then take down the dehaze just a little bit. So the way frequency separation works is it blurs the low frequency while keeping the high frequency. So by bumping up the texture and taking down the clarity, that's essentially what I'm trying to do. It's not the most obvious change, but here you can see kind of a before and after. Oops. I turn this off here. You can kind of see the effect it's doing. So it's getting rid of some of these harder lines. It's making her skin look a little softer. And if I like this effect, I can also go here and pick here, new local skin correction. I can call this skin. And then for if I want to apply the same thing here, just make sure I'm on skin. It's going to apply those corrections ahead of time, and then I can paint in the areas where I want that. So anywhere where her skin is, I can go in, paint that. If I want to see my overlay, I can just hit Y. And also if you hold down Option, it's going to give you the erase here. Oops, way too big. Just if you want to get it out of the areas that aren't her skin. So something like that. I'm gonna hit V again, Y again, sorry. So I'm happy with that in terms of local adjustments. Next we have the gradiated filter or graduated filter. I'm not going to use that for this. Radial filter. So this is something I really like to do on all my portraits, and that's to punch up the eyes. So first I want to reset the local correction so that it's not applying any correction. And then with my radial filter selected here, I'm going to go here. Now, unfortunately, I can't see my overlay, so let's turn that on. And let's also hit Y so I can see which part. So oftentimes you'll see that this is inverted. Just make sure the red part, which is the part that it's going to apply the effect to, is the part that you want it applying the effect to. In this case, I don't want it affecting the top of her eye there, so I can just use my erase tool here and just erase her eyelashes from this. So it's just applying to her eye there. Something like this. I can hit V, hit Y to get rid of those. What I want to do here is I want to increase the exposure. Now that is too bright, but we're going to compensate for that with a little bit of contrast, taking down the blacks. Actually, let's leave the blacks alone, and instead let's use clarity to get our darkness back in there, and maybe even some texture. Let's see a before and after real quick. Yeah, so we're not adding lightness, but what we are doing is adding crispiness and adding more light to the catch light in her eye. And that just looks really good for eyes. We can also, if we'd like, add just a tinge of more color into her eye. So we can go in here. Oops. Okay, so now you'll notice any adjustments I make are not applying. And if you run into this, it's because you deselected. So right now it's on new rather than seeing these activated. So what you can do is turn on your overlay and just click on it. And now you'll be able to make those adjustments. So if you ever find yourself wondering why changes aren't happening, that's probably why, is because you unselected it. So I want to just, this is her natural color, so it is green. There's tinges of green and brown in there. I want to just accentuate her natural color, so not going to go hog wild, but just add a touch of a little bit of a warm green in there. Something like that. Okay, next, I could try to apply it to this. The problem right now is that it looks like this is a more brown eye, whereas this is a more green eye. So let's go ahead, turn the overlay on and do a duplicate, which is a right mouse click, and bring this over here. Now that looks better. The problem is this white shouldn't, or sorry, it shouldn't be affecting the net so much. So let's zoom in even more here and let's see if we can fix that. So let's turn on the mask, and what I want to do is under range mask go to luminance, because I know it's the light areas that I don't want it affecting. And this I can go, and this works similar to the blending options in Photoshop actually. You can just go here and just kind of pull it down from the top, and now it's gotten rid of it in that highlight area. And if I do Command 0, that looks good. Now both her colors, both her eyes look like they're the same color, which is the effect I want to achieve. All right, I obviously don't need to do any red eye. I'm not going to use any presets, so I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. Now I can actually go back to the edit, and if I want to give it a nice color grade, I can do that in here with a curve. So I'm going to go to the blue, bring up the bottom, bring down the top, something like that looks really nice. And then I could also go to detail and maybe give it some sharpening. Before I upload it. Something like that. Maybe I want to give it a bit of a vignette. And to do that, my preferred way of doing vignettes is with the radial filter. So I'm going to make sure I have no corrections being applied. I'm just going to make a big one. Let's turn this on. That might be too big. The nice thing about doing a vignette with this is you have more control. Like I can rotate the vignette so that it's highlighting the area that I want to highlight. So something like this, and then I can hit Y, and you'll notice it's going to apply the the vignette to her instead of around it. So we'll just invert that. I kind of want to increase the feather and then maybe make the whole thing a bit bigger. But this is the area that I want vignetted all around that. So now I'm going to do V and Y to turn those off, and then just go in here, take down the contrast, and I also want to make that bluer. So kind of blue around her so that her face is more warm. Maybe something like that. And then in my edit, I might even compensate for that by making her a little bit warmer. And I'm pretty happy with that. Here's the before, Here's the after, all just with Camera Raw. I think that looks really nice. For this next one, I'm going to take a snapshot and turn it into kind of a striking black and white photograph. And this is a photo I took that I wasn't that impressed with, but after playing with it in Adobe Camera Raw, I actually came up with an image that I really, really liked. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. All right, next I want to address some of the black and white features. So this is actually the same model, very beautiful woman. And this is a photo I just took kind of casually outside, standing under, it was kind of a cloudy day, so we had like nice ambient lighting, and I decided to just shoot one photo. But I didn't really know what I could do with the photo. It looks like a snapshot. It's obviously not a studio portrait like this one. And this is where the black and white came into play. And I actually turned this into a photo I really liked. I'm going to show you how to do that just using Camera Raw. So first things first, let's just make our basic adjustments. Let's take down the contrast just a bit. Or sorry, the exposure, maybe just the highlights, just so we're getting a little more detail back in here. And then I actually want to make these skin corrections before turning this to black and white. So I'm going to go in here and just clean up these few spots. On some of these where they're small, you kind of want to make your brush as small as you can to fit them. Just because it's going to leave more of the original image intact. All right, pretty happy with that. Okay, next thing we're going to do is plop it into black and white. And I kind of want basically to have her face kind of coming out of darkness. So to do that, I'm going to have to use a few of these filters to really get the background dark enough. So let's start with just a standard radial. I want to make sure that I reset it so that it's doesn't have any effect applied to it. And I basically want everything outside of this to be black. So let's go ahead. We're applying the right spot there. Might need to make it a little bit wider because I do want some of that hair detail showing. So maybe something like this. And then we're just going to take the exposure down. Now you'll notice it does not bring it to black even at -4, which is as dark as I can make it. Now I could try to mess with some of these, but what I'm going to do instead is go to my linear gradient. We'll reset this, and we're just going to add a few like this. And I also want to make this darker, but not as black as this. So I'm going to go to a local one here. And we'll make this a little bit bigger. And for this, I do want to see as I'm painting. Oh, actually, that looks nice. Something like that. Maybe I'll go to my erase tool and just kind of make sure it's not hitting her chin there. Something like that. I might even want more of a feather there. Just a little bit more of that there. And then for this one, I don't want to go quite as much. So something like this. So something like that looks quite nice. I'm going to go E to go back to my basic edits here. And now I kind of want to add some contrast. So I'm going to take this down and add a little bit of contrast. And then I really want to punch up her eyes. So let's go to the radial filter. I'm going to reset this, zoom in here, and let's go right in here. And let's hit Y. You can see we need to invert this. And then I want to erase the part that's not her actual eye there, like this. And then we can do VY. Now I'm going to increase the exposure. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit more than I usually would on a color photo here. So almost to the point where she looks like a zombie, and then compensate with the clarity, texture, and even dehaze. So I'm basically just really punching up the contrast like crazy in that area, and then using the exposure to try to get it. And I can kind of compare these two. I do know this is brighter than this, but it's not significantly brighter. It's really just the highlights are brighter. So I kind of like that. Let's go ahead and copy that to the other eye. So I'm going to turn my overlay back on. And then right mouse click and hit duplicate. And then just bring it to this eye here. Now this eye has a stronger catch light, so I may have to compensate on this one by just making the whites brighter so that both eyes look about the same. Okay, so let's go Command 0. Look at that, looking really nice. I still want her skin is a little bit too bright, so I'm going to go to my basic panel here. Just take the contrast down a little bit more. Maybe bring up the whites. And I also want to add some clarity to her hair and some to her eyelashes. I think that's just going to give it a nice effect. So let's go back to our local brush. I'm going to reset it. I'm going to turn my mask on so I can see where I'm adding it to. I want to add it to this hair that's going down here, to this hair that's going down here, to these eye areas here like that, and maybe even to her lip there. I don't want it to affect her skin, so I can even go under my range mask here under luminosity and kind of just take it away from the lighter areas, so something like this. So it's primarily hitting those darker areas. And then I'm going to hit V and Y and then go to clarity and increase that. You can see that's giving the hair here, and also maybe even increase the texture, giving that a little bit more of a kick and highlighting that. So I'm pretty happy with that. Last thing I want to do is just crop it so we don't have so much dead space. So here I'm going to make it 4:5. That's the format for Instagram. Now I want to switch it from profile to portrait. If I hit X on the keyboard, it's going to do that for me. So just like that. Happy with that. And there you can see, I mean, now if we do a before and after, you can see that kind of a boring, not boring, I mean, it's still a pretty face, but otherwise it's a relatively like a snapshot. But now it looks like a very interesting, captivating portrait. So that's before and that's after. This next photograph is a street photograph, and I'm going to use it to show you some of the geometry tools in Adobe Camera Raw, as well as the new color grading feature, which replaced the old split toning. All right, the next thing we're going to do is tackle this photo. And for this, what I really want to kind of show you is some of the geometry tools and what we can do with those, and also how we can selectively punch up various colors. So first things first, this already is pretty nice in terms of exposure and all that, so I'm not going to mess with that. I'm actually going to go straight into geometry and start straightening it. So I'm going to select this one here. Now you could do this and just see like that already does a pretty good job. Let's try the auto. I think this one does a better job personally. I also want to crop it a bit so that this feels centered. So let's go to our crop. Something like that. And I think having the top of the building is more interesting than having this foreground element there. Yeah, so we'll do that. So there you go. That already looks pretty darn cool. Now you do notice that this line is not really straight. So let's go to optics and turn on the profile correction. You can see it straighten that line out. Next, I want to punch up the color in this image. So first, let's try to just push it more toward neutral by just increasing, or pushing it more toward blue here. That way, when I do punch up the colors, they're gonna contrast more. Yeah, look at that. That looks really nice. And I want these to look a little more bright. So I'm just going to go to my radial filter here and add it. Turn this on so we can see what it's doing there. So something like this. Need this way more feathered. And let's turn those off. What I want to do here is I'm going to reset this, but I want to push the yellow up. I want to push the exposure up. And I want to decrease the dehaze so we get kind of a glow coming from them. And then I can even push a little bit of a yellow light into that glow. Which will give me kind of a nice effect that we're like seeing a glow on those lights there. Next, I want to really punch up the green here. So I'm going to do a new Radial filter. And you can see it's applying the last effects to that filter. So we'll reset that up here. And here I just want to push up the yellow and the green. And I just want it to apply to this green here. So what I can do is under my range mask, go to color, and then just select that green color there. And you can see it just got rid of it around there. So now it's just applying it to the green. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right mouse click and duplicate this, and then just apply it to this green that's up here as well. Like so. And then I want to vignette the whole image. So I'm going to use a radial filter to do that. I'm going to reset it and then go like so. I can make sure I'm going to invert it, make sure that it's applying it to the outside. Now you'll see that my feather's probably too strong, so probably somewhere around there. And then we'll take down the exposure and maybe punch up or take some of the warmth out of these shadow areas. All right, so pretty happy with how that looks. Now what I want to show you is some of the features of color grading down here. So what this does, oops, color grading, there you go. So what this does is it allows us to add colors to our highlights and our shadows independently. So let's kind of push our highlights toward gold and then our shadows toward a bluish color. And sorry, those are our midtones. We want to do that to our highlights. For our midtones, we're going to leave those in the center there. We can also hold down. If we double click on it, it's going to reset that. And then if we want to adjust how much of that color is applying, we can drag this from the center is not applying at all. And then as we drag it out to the edge, it's applying more of that color to it. So this is fully applied. And then here, if the blue is adding, making it darker, we can adjust the luminance down here. So something like that. And then if we want to just play with the color, we can drag this around, see what various other colors look like applied there. How do you think the gold color looks best here? And we can always adjust how much it's applying there. And here you can see the before and the after. It's just giving the whole thing a more interesting look. Also, if we want to give the whole image a little bit of a color, we can do that in here. Maybe kind of an orange tinge there, something like that. Kind of interesting. I like that, and that's how you use the color grading. Also, so this allows basically a view that shows you the midtones, shadows, and highlights all at the same time. If you want to go in and just do the shadows, then just do the midtones and just do the highlights, you can do that with these. All the same controls are there. This is the luminance control, this is the saturation, and this is the color control. But if you want to see them here, hue, saturation, and luminance, you can do that as well. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do on this image is add a bit of a curve in the blue. I just want to bring up the blues. And you can't really do this with color grading, which is to make your blacks not black. With almost all these other tools, you can't make a black not black. Even if I go to the shadow areas and bring up the luminance all the way, without that curve, my pure blacks are going to stay pure black. So to really affect the blacks in the way to take them away from a pure black, you do have to use the curves there. All right, pretty happy with that. Here you can see the before and the after. This last photograph is a landscape, and I'm going to show you how with some of the tools in Adobe Camera Raw, you can restore lost information in both your shadows and highlights and kind of turn a rather boring image into something a lot more exciting. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, the last image I want to tackle here is this kind of a landscape photo, and this was taken up from Big Bear. And for this shot, let's go to our basic panel first, and let's adjust the exposure, get a little bit more detail coming into this area here. Now you'll notice as I do that, I'm getting rid of detail in the sky. So let's take our highlights and bring those back down. You can also bring the exposure back down a little bit and just pull the shadows up to try to get more detail in this area. And for this, it kind of has a little bit of a flat look. So what I might do is just pull up the whites a little bit and take the blacks down a little bit to give it a little bit of a nicer contrast. can also try clarity and dehaze here. So clarity is going to give me a little more textural detail in here, and then dehaze is going to do the same, but in this kind of background area. So something like that looks quite nice. Let's pump in some vibrance. And the other thing I want to do here, let's go to our crop tool, and I'm going to use a straighten tool here. You can see my horizon in the background is not straight, to kind of go from one side to the other and see how that looks. Like already that looks a lot straighter. So let's leave it at that. I think that's good enough. All right, then I want to use my local brush adjustment here. I'm going to turn on the overlay and mask while I'm brushing and just kind of target this area here. And maybe this area here. Okay, let's turn those off. What I want to do is I want to increase my exposure in these areas. Just try to get some more of that detail out there. Good, that looks good. And all right, next I'm going to use the gradiated filter. What I want to do is add a bunch of color to the sky. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to reset this and turn on my mask, and then use my erase tool here to paint out where I don't want this. So I don't want it in these foreground areas, so we'll just paint that out like that. And then I can turn off these so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take the exposure down, increase the contrast, and maybe push it toward a magenta. Just a little toward magenta to give a nice color in the sky. You can also try clarity, which is going to bring out the detail in these. And then also I'm going to erase just a little bit there. I feel like that looks a little more natural there, like that. And then we can also add a little bit of saturation there. Something like that looks pretty nice. Okay, and then finally, I want to add kind of a vignette to the whole image. So where I'm going to go to the radial, I'm just going to reset this, and then go something like this. If I hit Y, just make sure that my mask is on the outside, not on the inside. That looks good. And then I can turn this off and just take this down. So something like this. And after I've done that, I can kind of see, okay, well, actually I could have a little more exposure in my center. So I'll hit E to go back to my basic panel here and just bring up my exposure a little bit. Something like that. So pretty happy with that. This is before and after, and this shows you really the power of Camera Raw and taking photos that are in a raw format. Is you have so much more information than you would ever have if this was a JPEG. Trying to get all that detail back in there would be almost impossible. And this is all Camera Raw, no Photoshop, just using the information in the raw file to pull all that out. So there you have it. That completes this tutorial. Now there are more features to Adobe Camera Raw, and if you want more training on both Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop, I do have a course called Photoshop Basics for Photographers that goes quite extensively into all of this, as well as a whole lot more that you would want to know as a photographer or as someone who wants to learn and use Photoshop. I've included a link to that in the description of this video as well. If you like this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment. I do read them all. Turn on notifications, share this video, do all that good stuff that you do for the content creators that you like. And here's some other video tutorials that you can check out. And I will see you next time.